At 6:24 a.m. on May 19, 2026, near Pokrovsk, the lead armored vehicle of a Russian reinforcement column was hit by a Ukrainian FPV drone. The blast tore through the front section, pushed the vehicle sideways, and blocked the narrow road within seconds. Behind it, more than 80 Russian troops and around 22 vehicles were suddenly trapped in a line they could no longer control. Trucks braked hard, light vehicles tried to escape into the muddy shoulder, and smoke began spreading across the route as follow-up drones moved in. This was not just another strike on a single vehicle. It was the moment an entire reinforcement push lost speed, direction, and coordination. One explosion turned movement into a choke point. Before we break down how Ukrainian reconnaissance and FPV drones tracked, trapped, and dismantled this convoy, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more clear battlefield analysis and military updates. At 5:40 a.m., a Russian reinforcement column began moving toward the western approaches of Pokrovsk under a thin layer of morning fog. The force was reported to include about 86 troops and 22 vehicles, including 11 troop trucks, 4 armored vehicles, 2 tanks or heavy fighting vehicles, and several lighter transports, including quad bikes used along the field edges. At ground level, the fog seemed useful. It blurred the tree lines, softened the road ahead, and gave the drivers a narrow sense of cover. But from above, the movement was still readable. The vehicles followed one damaged road, and every turn, pause, and correction left a pattern that could be tracked. A Ukrainian reconnaissance FPV detected the column before it reached the most dangerous part of the route. It did not strike. It watched. The drone held altitude, kept the lead vehicles inside the frame, and measured how the convoy moved over broken asphalt, muddy shoulders, and shallow roadside ditches. The problem was already forming. The spacing between vehicles was uneven. Trucks slowed at potholes. Armored vehicles compressed the line behind them. Lighter vehicles tried to stay flexible, but they were still tied to the same road. There were no clear signs of anti-drone nets over the troop carriers. No visible electronic warfare vehicle appeared to shield the formation. No escort fire pushed against the sky. The convoy was still intact, still moving, and still believing speed could protect it. But by 5:58 a.m., the route, the rhythm, and the weak points of the entire column had already been recorded from above. At 6:12 a.m., the convoy reached a stretch where the road tightened between a shallow ditch on the right and a broken tree line on the left. The vehicles were still moving, but the formation was no longer clean. The first trucks had already slowed through the damaged surface, and the lighter vehicles behind them were forced to adjust too quickly. Then the first Ukrainian FPV drone came in. It did not strike the lead vehicle. Instead, it targeted a light transport near the rear section of the column, where the spacing had become unstable. The FPV approached from a low angle, crossed the edge of the road, and slammed into the back of the vehicle. The first blast was sharp, but limited. It did not stop the entire convoy. It did something more dangerous. It broke the rhythm. The struck vehicle rolled forward a few meters, then stopped at an angle. Smoke began to rise from its rear compartment. Within seconds, a secondary explosion burst from fuel or equipment inside the vehicle, sending flames across the shoulder and forcing the trucks behind it to brake hard. In less than 20 seconds, nearly 6 vehicles compressed into a short section of road. Around 30 troops were now packed inside or beside vehicles that had suddenly lost spacing. Drivers looked for room to maneuver, but the ditch was too soft and the field edge was too uneven for a clean escape. The convoy still had a chance to push forward, but the warning was now obvious. It had been seen, measured, and tested from above. Before the main strike unfolds, remember to subscribe to the channel for more clear battlefield breakdowns and military analysis. Because what happened next was not a random follow-up. The first hit had forced the column to tighten. The reconnaissance FPV now had a clearer picture of the road, the density, and the lead vehicles moving toward the narrowest point. The real trap was still ahead. At 6:24 a.m., the lead armored vehicle entered the narrowest section of the route. The road bent slightly between muddy shoulders, a shallow ditch, and broken ground that offered no safe place for a heavy vehicle to turn. Behind it, the convoy had already tightened after the earlier hit, leaving the next trucks too close to react cleanly. Then the main strike came. A Ukrainian FPV drone dropped low along the road, using the line of movement as its guide. The lead armored vehicle stayed centered in the reconnaissance feed. For a few seconds, the column was still moving, still trying to escape the exposed stretch. Then the FPV committed from the front quarter and struck the vehicle near its forward section. The explosion was heavy enough to stop the entire formation. The armored vehicle jolted sideways, smoke poured from the front, and its damaged hull blocked most of the lane. The second vehicle braked hard. The third nearly collided with it. Farther back, drivers reacted only to brake lights and smoke, not to a full view of what had happened ahead. In less than half a minute, almost 14 vehicles were trapped inside a corridor, roughly 180 meters long. More than 70 troops were either still inside vehicles or forced to climb down under pressure. The convoy had lost its most important advantage: forward motion. The first FPV did not need to destroy every vehicle. It only had to remove the road. A follow-up Ukrainian FPV drone struck a truck that tried to edge toward the shoulder. Another hit landed near an armored vehicle that had stopped behind the burning lead section. The road became a closed lane of smoke, stalled engines, and blocked exits. By this point, the reinforcement mission was no longer about reaching the front. It had become a struggle to get out of a kill zone created by one accurate strike at the worst possible location. At 6:31 a.m., the blocked road had become a line of smoke, stalled engines, and confused movement. The lead vehicle was burning at the front of the choke point, while the trucks behind it had nowhere clean to go. Some drivers tried to reverse, but the gaps were too short. Others turned toward the shoulder, only to find mud and broken ground pulling the wheels down. The convoy was no longer moving as one formation. A bomber drone appeared higher above the road and adjusted over the most crowded section. It did not rush. It waited for the trapped vehicles and dismounted troops to gather around the same narrow area. Then the munition dropped into the center of the jam, close to a truck, an armored vehicle, and several soldiers trying to move away from the wreckage. The blast threw dirt and fragments across the road, forcing those using the damaged vehicles as cover to scatter. Smoke that had seemed useful a minute earlier now worked against them, because it slowed their movement without fully hiding them from the drone feed above. Within minutes, the column split into several small groups. Around 18 troops moved toward the ditch line on the right. Another 12 to 15 tried to reach the broken tree line on the left. A smaller group stayed near the vehicles to pull wounded men away from the heat and fire. One light transport attempted to cross the field, but its wheels sank after less than 40 meters, forcing the crew to abandon it. The reconnaissance FPV continued to watch the entire area. It tracked where groups stopped, where vehicles still had engines running, and where men gathered too closely near doors or wrecks. By 6:38 a.m., the original convoy had disappeared as a fighting formation. What remained was a series of isolated survival moves around a road that could no longer carry them forward. At 6:48 a.m., the road near the choke point was no longer a route of advance. It had become a blocked corridor of damaged vehicles, smoke, scattered equipment, and abandoned positions. The original purpose of the convoy was gone. What had started as a reinforcement movement toward the front had turned into an effort to pull survivors and working vehicles away from the strike zone. At least 8 vehicles were reported destroyed or disabled in place. Another 5 to 6 vehicles remained structurally intact but could not move because the lead wreck blocked the road. The shoulders were too soft and the vehicles behind them were packed too tightly to turn. Some engines were still running, but the convoy itself was finished as a coordinated force. The most serious damage was not only the loss of equipment. It was the loss of timing. The units waiting ahead expected fresh troops, extra firepower, and replacement vehicles within the hour. Instead, the road behind them went silent. The additional 80-plus soldiers never arrived as a single organized group. Some withdrew on foot toward tree lines. Others stayed near ditches, trying to move wounded men away from the burning vehicles. A few surviving crews attempted to redirect their vehicles through field tracks, but the soft ground made every turn slow and risky. Recovery teams could not enter the area quickly. Secondary fires, unexploded munitions, and the continued threat from Ukrainian FPV drones made the road too dangerous to approach. The same route that was supposed to carry reinforcements had now become a marked danger zone for any follow-up movement. By 7:05 a.m., the convoy's failure had already affected the larger situation. The forward elements had to adjust without the expected manpower. Planned pressure on nearby Ukrainian positions slowed. The loss of momentum forced commanders to choose between waiting, rerouting, or sending smaller groups through less direct paths. This is where the strike became more than a damaged column. It became a disruption to the battle rhythm. One blocked lead vehicle, several follow-up drone hits, and a narrow road were enough to delay a reinforcement plan that depended on speed. The convoy still had survivors. Some vehicles may have escaped, but the mission as a formed movement had failed before it reached its destination. At 7:10 a.m., smoke was still rising from the narrow road. The vehicles that had not burned were scattered around the choke point, some facing forward, some angled toward the mud, and others left in place after their crews abandoned them. The column had not been wiped out in one single moment. It had been broken step by step. First by detection, then by compression, then by a strike that removed its ability to move. By this stage, the battlefield result was clear. A reinforcement group of roughly 86 troops and 22 vehicles had failed to reach its intended point as a formed unit. Reports suggested that around 9 vehicles were destroyed or disabled, while several others were forced to withdraw or remain stranded until recovery became possible. What mattered most was not only the damage on the road, but the time lost at the front. In my view, the key lesson is simple. Modern convoys are most vulnerable when their movement becomes predictable. Armor, speed, and numbers can still matter, but they do not solve the problem of being watched from above. Once a reconnaissance FPV fixes the route, and Ukrainian FPV drones begin shaping the movement, a large column can quickly lose the freedom to choose where it goes next. The strike on the lead armored vehicle was important because it changed the situation from movement to congestion. After that, every delayed truck, every blocked exit, and every group gathering near a vehicle created another risk. A bomber drone did not need to chase the entire force. It only had to focus on the section where the road had already trapped them. This incident shows why future reinforcement movements may need to be smaller, faster, and harder to read. Larger columns may require stronger electronic warfare, better spacing, anti-drone nets, decoy routes, and more disciplined movement through exposed ground. Without those layers, a road that looks usable from the ground can become a trap once drones are above it. The bigger question is what comes next. Should forces continue using larger convoys to move troops quickly, or should they divide into smaller groups, accept slower coordination, and reduce the risk of being locked in one place? What do you think is the safer option on today's battlefield? Share your view in the comments.
By the time the smoke began to thin, the meaning of the engagement was clear. This was not only a story about burned vehicles on a narrow road near Pokrovsk. It was a story about how quickly a reinforcement mission can collapse when movement is detected, measured, and stopped at the wrong place. The convoy started with a clear purpose: move troops, vehicles, and support closer to the line before the situation changed. But once the reconnaissance FPV found the column, the road was no longer just a route. It became a tracked corridor. Every slowdown, every tight turn, and every compressed gap gave the Ukrainian drone teams a clearer picture of where the pressure point would be. The first strike near the rear exposed the formation. The secondary explosion forced the vehicles to tighten. Then the main FPV hit on the lead armored vehicle turned the entire column into a stalled target. After that, the convoy lost the one thing it needed most: freedom to move. Trucks could not pass. Armored vehicles could not turn. Troops had to leave their vehicles under pressure, and the mission shifted from reinforcement to survival. That is the larger lesson from this event. On the modern battlefield, a convoy does not have to be destroyed completely to fail. It only has to be delayed, blocked, and separated from its original timing. If the troops do not arrive when they are needed, the front line does not receive the support it expected. If vehicles are abandoned or redirected, the plan behind them also begins to break apart. Ukrainian FPV drones, reconnaissance FPV, and bomber drones showed how powerful coordination from above can be when a road limits movement below. One accurate strike created the choke point. Follow-up hits expanded the damage. Secondary fires made recovery slower and more dangerous. For future operations, the message is direct. Large convoys moving on predictable roads will need stronger protection, wider spacing, electronic warfare, anti-drone nets, alternate routes, and faster reaction plans. Without those measures, speed alone may not be enough. Near Pokrovsk, one blocked road was enough to stop a reinforcement push. And once the convoy stopped moving, the battle had already changed.